She was soaked, 17, holding a wrench. He thought she was just a kid in the rain. Until she fixed his car. In the storm, with tools from her backpack and fire in her eyes. He didn't know her name, but it's a name he'd never forget. A girl in a maroon school jacket, soaked to the elbows, her backpack clinging to her shoulder like a second spine. She stood at the edge of a stalled silver sedan, hood popped, steam curling out from somewhere beneath. One hand gripped a flashlight, the kind you'd find in a junk drawer, half flickering. The other braced against the car frame as she leaned forward, eyes scanning the tangled mess of wires and wet metal like she was reading a language no one else could see. Inside the car sat a man in a dark suit, expensive, soaked, the kind of man who probably didn't even pump his own gas. But right now, he was helpless, staring at the storm, staring at her. The girl didn't say much. She had already asked if he needed help. He'd hesitated, surprised, then nodded. Not because he thought she could fix anything, but because no one else had stopped. Now here she was, kneeling in a puddle, in the rain, on a Thursday. The wind picked up, flinging her curls against her face. She didn't flinch. She adjusted a clamp, tapped something under the hood, bit her lip in concentration. Her name was Imani Carter, 17, student, daughter, dreamer, mechanically gifted and chronically underestimated. She didn't know who the man in the car was, and he didn't know who she was either. But both of their lives, though they didn't know it yet, were about to change. Not because of luck, not because of destiny, but because of a moment soaked in rainwater, lit by a dying flashlight, and powered by a quiet belief that helping someone should never depend on who they are, only on what they need. She pressed the flashlight between her teeth, freeing both hands. The engine was still warm, a good sign, but the battery connectors looked loose. The corrosion on the terminals told a story of neglect, not failure. She jiggled one wire gently, then gave the starter a nod. "Try it now," she called through the rain, muffled by thunder. The man blinked. "You sure?" "No," she said with a slight grin. "But it's better than waiting for roadside assistance in a thunderstorm." He turned the key. The engine coughed once, then sputtered to life. Lights flickered on. Wipers swiped across the windshield. The radio burst out a weather report mid-sentence. Imani stepped back, water dripping from her jacket sleeve as she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The man opened the door and stepped out into the rain, jacket clinging to his shoulders. Disbelief etched across his face. "You actually fixed it," she shrugged. "Not really. Just helped it remember what it's supposed to do." He reached into his coat, pulled out his wallet. "Let me give you something." But Imani was already grabbing her backpack. "I'm good," she said. "Just glad you're not stuck anymore." "Are you sure?" She nodded, already backing away, her sneakers squishing with every step. "Have a good night, sir." Then she turned, hoodie sagging from the weight of the water, and walked off into the rain. He stood there, money in hand, watching her fade into the storm like some strange dream. No name, no request, no phone number, just a wrench, a flashlight, and a lesson he didn't know he needed. He didn't know her name. Not yet. But he'd remember her face. Because sometimes, when grace finds you, it doesn't come with thunder. It just shows up, soaked to the skin, and helps you start again. Imani Carter didn't come from much. But what she had, she made work. She lived with her mom and little brother in a 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. The walls were thin. The faucet in the kitchen leaked. The heat clicked off when it felt like it. But it was home. Her mom worked double shifts as a nurse tech, sometimes staying overnight when the hospital was short-staffed. Imani cooked dinner, checked her brother's homework, and made sure the lights were off before midnight. And in between all that, she studied hard. Her dream was engineering, mechanical, aerospace, robotics. She didn't care which. She just knew she loved how things worked, and more importantly, why they didn't. She'd been opening up machines since she was 7. First, it was the toaster. then her mom's broken hairdryer. By 13, she'd fixed half the appliances in their apartment complex. Not because she was trying to prove anything, but because no one else could afford to hire someone. She learned from YouTube, from books pulled off library shelves, from asking questions in forums where no one knew she was a teenager. School was where she shined quietly. Top of her physics class, a math tutor on the side. Her teachers said she had potential, but potential didn't pay tuition. That's why the Langston National Scholars Program mattered. It was one of the most competitive scholarships in the country. Only 3 students selected per state. Full ride, living stipend, internships, access. She'd spent months perfecting her application, writing and rewriting her essay late into the night, highlighting her grades, her leadership, her resilience. But what she didn't have was flash. No glossy extracurriculars, no elite summer camps, no legacy ties. Just her. And the things she could build with her hands. She didn't talk much about the scholarship at school. Most of her classmates either didn't believe they had a shot, or believed someone like her never would. But that didn't stop her. Every night, once her brother was asleep and the dishes were done, she'd pull out her old laptop, the one with the cracked corner and missing F key, and study. Not because anyone told her to, but because she knew what was waiting for her if she didn't. She loved the feeling of solving something that didn't want to be solved, of bringing order to chaos, of hearing a machine whir back to life after everyone else had given up on it. In a world that didn't always make sense, engineering did. It had rules. It had logic. It didn't care where you came from, only that you could make something work. And she could. She didn't have private tutors, but she had grit. She didn't wear brand-name sneakers, but she could balance a budget down to the dollar. Her mom once told her, "Baby, when people don't see you, it's not your job to scream louder. Just build something so bright, they have no choice but to look." That became her compass. So when the scholarship deadline came, Imani didn't hesitate. She hit submit, closed her laptop, took a deep breath, and went back to her flashcards. Because no matter what happened next, she wasn't waiting on a miracle. She was building her own. It was a Friday afternoon when it happened. Imani had stayed late at the public library, trying to squeeze in a little more time with a textbook on thermodynamics. The sun had dipped below the horizon faster than she expected, and clouds were already gathering above. She pulled her hood up, zipped her jacket, and started walking the familiar route home. 10 blocks, 3 crosswalks, and 1 long stretch with no streetlights. By the time she reached the edge of Park Avenue, the rain had begun light at first, then pounding within seconds. The kind of rain that felt personal, like the sky was trying to say something. Most people would have ducked under the nearest awning. But Imani kept walking. She'd done this before. As she rounded the corner near 15th Street, she noticed it. A car, hazard lights blinking, steam rising faintly from under the hood, and inside a man on his phone gesturing in frustration. She slowed. The rain was falling harder now, sliding down her sleeves, pooling in her shoes. She could have walked right past him. No one would have blamed her. She didn't know him. He wasn't calling for help. She was cold, tired, soaked. And still, something made her stop. She took 2 steps toward the vehicle, then 3, hesitated. Her mom's voice echoed in her head. "If you see someone struggling and you know how to help, don't look away." So she knocked lightly on the passenger window. The man turned, startled. She gestured toward the open hood. He cracked the window just enough to hear her voice. "You need a jump?" she asked. "Or maybe more than that?" The man blinked, water dripping from his temple. He looked like someone important, the kind of person who usually didn't need help from teenage girls in school jackets. I think the battery's dead," he said, voice muffled by the window. "Or the starter. It just died in the middle of the road." Imani nodded. "Pop the hood?" He hesitated, but then leaned over and hit the latch. The hood creaked open. Steam rolled out. She leaned in, squinting through the rain. Her flashlight barely pierced the downpour, but it was enough to see the corroded terminals and a loose ground wire flapping uselessly to one side. "You got jumper cables?" she asked. The man checked the trunk. "Number. Figures," she muttered, almost to herself. "Okay, you mind if I try something?" He looked unsure. "You know what you're doing?" Imani gave a shrug, half smile. "We'll find out." She pulled her hair into a bun, tightened her sleeves, and pulled a set of multi-tools from her backpack, ones she used to fix her neighbors' scooters and blenders and lawnmowers. The rain didn't stop. Neither did she. She wiped the terminals, resecured the ground connection with a temporary clamp, and checked the fuse box with practiced eyes. All while water soaked through her socks and lightning flashed in the distance. When she finally stepped back, she looked at the man and nodded. "Try the key." He slid into the seat, turned. The engine coughed, then roared. Alive. The man stared at the dashboard like it had come back from the dead. He got out, bewildered. "You fixed it?" Imani just smiled. "Not fixed, just convinced it to cooperate." And just like that, she turned to leave. "Wait," the man called after her, water still dripping from his hair. "You don't want anything for that?" Imani paused, turned slightly, shrugged. "You needed help. I had tools, that's all." He jogged a few steps forward, pulling out his wallet. "At least let me give you something. Gas, money, food, something." She shook her head. "No, thank you." He frowned. "Are you sure?" Imani smiled, a little softer now. "You were stuck. I helped. That's enough." The man looked at her like she was speaking a language he hadn't heard in years. She didn't fit the mold. A high schooler, drenched from head to toe, holding rusted pliers like a pro mechanic and walking away from money like it meant nothing. He studied her, unsure what to say next. "What's your name?" he finally asked. "Imani." "Imani what?" She hesitated, then answered, "Imani Carter." He nodded, filing it away like it mattered. "Thank you, Imani." "You're welcome, sir." A beat of silence passed between them. Then she slung her soaked backpack higher onto her shoulder and kept walking, shoes squeaking with every step. The man stood in the rain, still holding the wallet he never got to open. He watched until she turned the corner, until the red blinking lights of the crosswalk swallowed her silhouette, until he was alone again. Only now, the car wasn't the thing that had changed. He was. As Imani disappeared into the rain, the man lingered beside his car, still processing what had just happened. He wasn't used to being helped, especially not like that. Not by someone so young, so self-assured, so unapologetically competent. He looked down at his hands, one still holding his wallet, the other empty. Not long ago, that wallet solved most things. Tonight, it had felt useless. Eventually, he got back in the car, turned on the heater. But even as the windshield cleared and warmth returned to his fingers, his thoughts didn't move forward. They circled. Her voice, her face, the way she hadn't asked for praise or posed for a moment of gratitude. He remembered her name. Imani Carter. It rang in his mind with quiet weight, like something he should remember. He thought about his own daughter, a college grad now, bright, articulate, but never once had she fixed anything mechanical in her life. He wasn't comparing, but he couldn't ignore the contrast. That girl had shown up with nothing but a flashlight and confidence, and somehow restored more than just a stalled engine. By the time he pulled into his hotel, the rain had stopped. But his thoughts hadn't pharmastings. In his room, he peeled off his wet jacket, checked the time, and sighed. He'd missed his dinner meeting, missed 3 calls, but he didn't care. Instead, he opened his laptop and typed a name into his notes app. Imani Carter. Below it, he wrote, 17, knows electrical systems, calm under pressure, humble, kind, no ask, just action. He didn't know yet where the name would appear again. He didn't know what program she might have applied for. Didn't know her school, her GPA, her background. But he knew this. If someone like her wanted to go somewhere, She should never be stopped by something as ordinary as cost. 3 weeks had passed. The rain was long gone. Spring had settled in warm breezes, longer days, blooming sidewalks. But inside Imani's chest, something else had been building. A quiet mix of nerves and hope. She'd almost forgotten about the scholarship, not because it didn't matter, but because she didn't want to count on something that might never call her name. Then one Wednesday afternoon, she opened the mailbox and froze. A white envelope, heavy, embossed seal. Return address, Langston National Scholars Program. Her heart stuttered. She ran upstairs, tore it open at the kitchen counter while her brother munched cereal beside her. She didn't read it out loud. She just stared. Then smiled. A slow, disbelieving, trembling smile. Imani Carter, Southwood High School. You have been selected for the final round of national interviews. All expenses covered. Round-trip transportation to the regional conference. Formal interview with the board. She read it again. And again. Then hugged her brother so hard he spilled his milk. The next week was a blur: emails, phone calls, preparing a portfolio, rereading her essay until she could recite it in her sleep. Her mother cried when she saw the itinerary. Her teachers gave her good luck cards and mock interview questions. Her neighbors offered prayers, hugs, and a ride to the airport. But through it all, Imani stayed grounded. She wasn't a spotlight girl. She just wanted to show them who she was. So, on the morning of the interview, she wore her cleanest clothes, a pressed button-down, black slacks, the same worn backpack she'd carried all year. And inside it, her toolkit, not because anyone asked, but because that's who she was. The conference was held at a sprawling hotel downtown: glass walls, chandeliered ceilings, carpet so thick her footsteps disappeared into it. Imani felt out of place the moment she stepped inside. Other candidates stood in clusters, kids from prep academies and magnet schools, wearing blazers with embroidered crests and speaking in polished tones about robotics teams, startup internships, and Model UN. She smiled politely, kept her hands folded, waited for her number to be called. Inside the waiting room, she sat beside a girl reading a hardcover economics textbook, and a boy reviewing slides on a tablet with noise-canceling headphones. Imani quietly double-checked her resume, folded it back into her folder, tapped her knee. When her name was called, she stood, whispered, "Let's go," to herself, and followed the staffer down a quiet hallway to a glass-walled interview room. The door opened. There were 3 people seated inside, 2 women, one in glasses, one taking notes, and in the center, him, the man from the stalled car, the one she'd helped, the one whose name she never got. He looked up, met her eyes, and froze. Imani blinked. He was already rising from his seat, face shifting from formality to something close to awe. "Imani Carter," he said, more to himself than to the room. She gave a respectful nod, trying to read the moment, unsure if she should say something. Then he smiled wide, real, unmistakable. "You made it," he said softly. She nodded again, confused but calm. "Yes, sir." The other 2 interviewers looked at him, then at her. And for the first time since she'd walked into the building, Imani didn't feel like she had to prove she belonged. She already had. The interview began like any other. They asked about her grades, her goals, her favorite class, a time she overcame adversity. She answered clearly, thoughtfully, but not rehearsed. She spoke about fixing broken appliances in her building, how she learned to solder using library books and an old toaster, how engineering wasn't just her dream, it was her language. Then came the final question. One of the women leaned forward and asked, "If you're given this scholarship, what will you do with it beyond school?" Imani paused. "I'd build something," she said, "not just for me." The woman smiled. "Like what?" Imani thought for a moment. "My neighborhood doesn't have a single repair center. People throw things away because no one can fix them. I want to change that. I want to open a shop somewhere kids can come after school, take apart broken stuff, and learn how to make it work again." The man in the center, Mr. Langston, was quiet, but his eyes were warm. He waited for the others to finish their notes, then asked just one question of his own. Do you often stop in the rain for people you don't know? Imani looked up sharply, startled. The women turned to him, puzzled. She hesitated, then smiled just slightly. I guess so, she said. If someone's stuck and I can help, why wouldn't I? Langston nodded. That was all he needed. As Imani stood to leave, he shook her hand and whispered, You helped me long before today. And you reminded me what this scholarship is supposed to stand for. She didn't fully understand what he meant, not yet. But a week later, when the acceptance letter came, with her name on the top and a full ride behind it, she remembered the car, the rain, and the man who no longer seemed like a stranger. Because kindness leaves fingerprints, even on people with titles. David Langston sat alone in his office, the letter of acceptance still fresh on his desk. He'd signed it personally, not because protocol required it, but because this one meant something different. He couldn't stop thinking about that night. The rain, the moment the car died, and the girl soaked, shivering, backpack slung to one side who didn't hesitate. He'd met thousands of students over the years, interviewed hundreds, funded dozens, but he'd never been helped on the side of a road by one. That moment had haunted him not because he was embarrassed, but because it cracked open something in him that had grown a little too closed. For years, he'd leaned on stats, test scores, rankings, prestige, and somewhere along the way, he'd started seeing applicants as data, not stories. But Imani wasn't data. She was real. Hands steady under pressure, voice calm, spirit humble. She hadn't known who he was, hadn't asked for anything, and in doing so, she reminded him what the scholarship had been created for in the first place. Not to reward the most polished, but to elevate the most promising. The kind who help without expectation, who build without permission, who carry more than grades, they carry grit. Langston stared at her file again. GPA, excellent. Resources, limited. Essays, honest. Extracurriculars, sparse but full of substance. She wasn't the loudest. She wasn't the flashiest. But she was the kind of student who could shift a room just by showing up. And now, he was going to make sure she had the chance to. That week, he requested time during the internal committee meeting, the one where final scholarship recipients were reviewed. He didn't need to. The board trusted him. But this time, he wanted them to hear the story. Not the resume, not the metrics. The story. So he stood at the head of the long mahogany table, looked around at the other evaluators, deans, directors, philanthropists, and spoke. I'd like to tell you how I met Imani Carter, he began. And then, for the first time in a long time, he told a story without a podium, without polish, without any purpose other than truth. He described the rain, the stalled car, the flashlight, the rusted pliers, the girl who stepped forward without knowing who he was or caring. She never asked for anything, he said. She just saw something broken and tried to fix it. One of the board members leaned forward. She didn't know you were with Langston Scholars? Langston shook his head. Didn't flinch when she found out either. They listened, more intently than he expected. And when he finished, no one argued. They just nodded. Because everyone at that table, at some point, had been stuck in a car, in a job, in life. And they all knew what it meant for someone to help with no agenda. Imani's acceptance was unanimous. But Langston went a step further. He included a handwritten note with her scholarship packet, not for show, just for her. It read, You didn't just restart my car, Imani. You restarted the reason I do this. Imani never told anyone what really happened that night. Not because she was keeping a secret, but because to her, it hadn't felt like a story worth telling. She saw someone who needed help. She helped. That was it. She never imagined it would ripple like this, that a stalled engine in the rain would lead to an opportunity that would change her entire future. That a simple act of kindness, the kind that goes unnoticed every day, would find its way back to her, amplified. But that's the thing about grace. It doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes, it just waits, quietly, patiently, until the moment it's needed most. She didn't change who she was to get ahead. She didn't bend herself into someone else's expectations. She didn't polish her story. She just lived it. With integrity, with action, with heart. And it turns out, that was exactly what the world was waiting to notice. Not because she chased recognition, but because she showed up again and again as herself. Her story didn't go viral. There was no news article, no trending hashtag. But around her neighborhood, people started talking. The old mechanic down the block gave her a new wrench set, professional grade, he said. Her physics teacher framed a copy of her scholarship letter and hung it on the classroom wall. Her little brother started telling everyone, "My sister fixes everything, even rich people's cars." Imani never asked for any of it. She just kept showing up. To class, to her family, to every broken thing she believed could work again. Because in her world, greatness wasn't about applause. It was about impact, measured not in likes, but in lives. She became a quiet symbol for something bigger. That maybe the future isn't shaped by the loudest voices, but by the quiet ones who act when no one's watching. And that sometimes, the smallest moment, a knock on a fogged window, a flashlight held steady in the rain, can echo further than any resume ever could. Imani never asked to be noticed. She wasn't chasing recognition. She wasn't angling for favor. She saw a problem. She had the tools. And she stepped in. No camera. No speech. Just action. And that's the quiet beauty of this story. Not that she helped someone powerful, but that she helped without needing to know he was. Because real kindness doesn't require credentials. It doesn't ask for a spotlight. It just shows up. Especially when it's inconvenient. Especially when no one else does. We live in a world where we're taught to network up, to curate our image, to perform goodness where it can be seen. But Imani reminds us of something simpler and far more powerful. Help because you can. Help because it's right. Help because maybe, just maybe, the world you want starts with the choice you make in the moment no one's watching. So if this story moved you, if it reminded you of the kind of person you want to be, then pass it on. Not for Imani, but for the next kid standing in the rain, wondering if it's worth doing good when no one's clapping. And if you believe in stories like this, real stories about real people who change lives not with headlines, but with heart, then subscribe to Hidden Justice. Because the world doesn't just need heroes. It needs reminders that some of the strongest hands come with grease on the knuckles, rain in the eyes, and no need to be thanked.